It was bound to happen eventually. With a team of writers well versed in the ancient lore of Disney Ducks and over half a century of history to pull from, it was only a matter of time before Disney's Ducktales reboot finally wrote a story that left me in the dark. An adventure that explored the deeps of the ocean and dredged up a mystery that I just couldn't answer. Who the heck is Fethry Duck? One of my favorite things about Disney Duck lore, cartoons, and comics is how international it is. Donald Duck may be an American character made by an American company, but the lore and the roots of Donald Duck comics are so much deeper than that. Mickey Mouse may reign supreme on US shores, but on the world stage, Donald Duck is a superstar. In fact, most of the Donald Duck comics that are out there aren't even in English. Which kind of brings us to this episode of Ducktales, The Depths of Cousin Fethry. Like the name implies, it's an episode all about a distant relative of the Disney Duck cast, one that you might not be familiar with if you're an American Donald Duck fan. You wouldn't know it as an American fan, but this character's actually been featured in hundreds of stories, and he was popular enough in Brazil and other countries to get his own series that ran for like 50 issues, and he's been a lot over the years. According to the internet, Fethry's been a private investigator, a superhero, and like Donald, just kind of another person that Scrooge relies on to do odd jobs. He's been a part of Disney Duck lore since the 1950s. But because he's not a character that really has ever appeared regularly in American comics, I've gotta admit, I just don't know that much about him. Ever since this character's first appearance, he's been labeled as a bit of an eccentric, the kind of goofy person that goes all in on new fads and hobbies, no matter how bizarre. He's a character that's constantly fascinated by new things. A strange, enthusiastic, eccentric weirdo who loves indulging in his excitement for life. How we encounter him in Ducktales really kind of brings across how weird he is, or at least how weird his family sees he is. In the comics, he's sort of portrayed as a nuisance and a troublemaker to the lives of Donald and Scrooge, and that's kind of how he comes across in the new Ducktales cartoon too. Apparently, Fethry works on one of Scrooge's deep-sea labs, but every time he calls, Scrooge and Donald kinda just dismiss him, telling the boys that every time he calls them, he gets dragged off on some fool's errand, a big adventure that's ultimately just a waste of time. I mean, to their point, who wants to see a barnacle formation in the shape of a tractor? Well, these guys do.
Best time waste ever!
Wait, did we just steal this up?
I'm actually not going to talk too much about this episode itself, because, to be honest, it just didn't really grab me. It's a short adventure that sees Fethry taking the boys to the bottom of the ocean to show Huey and Dewey his underwater lab. But the trip gets derailed by unexpected disaster, danger, and adventure. It's an okay story, but it just wasn't my favorite. But there are a lot of little things I did like about it. I love that Fethry calls the nephew Little Donalds.
Hooray, little Donalds, you are here!
I think this is a really fun way to show his fondness for Donald, his cousin, and show his eccentricity in the way he just kind of can't remember the kids' names. I also really like his job. He's supposed to be taking care of one of Scrooge's underwater deep-sea labs, and the whole setup reminds me of the kind of futuristic vision of the world Walt Disney had in the original Epcot, and the ideas for underwater cities you find in attractions like Horizons. Even Fethry's spiel for his aquavators sounds kind of familiar.
As we descend, we ask you to keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle. No flash photography, and watch your children, please.
Even though the story of this episode didn't really grab me, I think it's these eccentricities of this character that this episode is really about. Yeah, he's a little bit weird, and he thinks differently from other people, but at his heart, he's really just a guy that wants to share his love for the world and life and curiosity with others. I'm not going to get too deep into this episode. I'm not an expert on Cousin Fethry, but it seems like this is a pretty good abridged adaptation of who he is. It's also a good example of one of the things I really like about this show. This is a pretty obscure character to feature for this show's audience, but they still found a way to integrate this fan favorite character, to find a way to reach out to international and European fans and use this obscure character, Fethry Duck, to tell a story. And I really like that. That's something this show has repeatedly done. It's dug deep into duck lore to find find characters that already have existed in the half century of Duck history to tell a simple story or to get a point across. They could have made a throwaway character for this, but I really appreciate that they found a character that would tell this message on its own. If you're curious about this episode, definitely find it and go watch it. It's not my favorite, but it's absolutely not a bad episode either. It's a fun adventure with Huey and Dewey, and a good look at Disney Duck lore that you might not be familiar with. But it doesn't feel like it's going to be essential to the storyline for the whole season. What is essential, though, is one side joke. It seems every time we meet one of Donald's other more obscure cousins, like Gladstone or Fethry, another character goes off on a big adventure that we don't get to see.
Launchpad. Oceanica? Is that you, my love?
What are you doing, Launchpad? What are all these women you have to rescue? What adventures are you going on? I want to know. I need the Launchpad show. I need this show. I need to know what's going on with you, Launchpad. While I'm sure this episode had a ton of references I didn't catch, there is one really cool one I did. Midway through the episode, Fethry stops off at something called the Tully Observatory. And this isn't something you would really get if you weren't following the Ducktales crew on Twitter, but Ben Tully is someone who helped the Ducktales crew get the science right for this episode, and they named the observatory after him. If you look up Ben Tully on Twitter, you can find his account. He talks about all kinds of science stuff, but if you go way back in the past, you can find this image of a cup he made for the Ducktales crew. Apparently, the Ducktales crew came out to one of his labs to learn some things to make sure they got the episode right, and he made them cups with glumgold on them. That's awesome. That fact, by the way, was brought to you by our lovely research department, my wife, Susie. She really wanted me to mention her in this episode. Love you, Susie. That's all I really have to say about this episode, though. Again, I didn't think the story was that interesting, but I did really enjoy this look at this Disney character that I don't know that much about. To the point that I kind of want to learn more about him and see what the European and Brazilian readers really love about this character. Hopefully I can find some comics Cousin Fethry and learn a little bit more about this worldwide duck history. Until next time, though, thanks for watching. Take it easy, Internet.